Day 1. I remember waking up the morning this all started and how my head hurt and I felt sort of drunk. Well, okay, maybe not drunk, but hungover. It was like someone had wrapped my brain tightly in a piece of cheesecloth. I staggered my way to the bathroom before the sun was even above the horizon and started my morning routine without thinking twice about anything. I mean, I guess that makes sense, right? Who could have predicted what actually happened? It's weird to say I remember, like all this happened years ago instead of so recently. So weird. Time has not been kind or made any sense. Anyway, I digress. I watched the news as I got dressed that morning, pulling a shirt over my head while the weather came on. Given the long drive I had from the burbs into the city, it was traffic and weather and traffic that I cared the most about. One always affected the other, and they were talking about steady, soaking rains for most of the day. Ugh, I groaned. I remember how I thought that was going to be the worst part of my day. When you work downtown, you have to deposit your cars in parking garages blocks from work to boot, so the steady soaking rains meant a long, slow slog of a commute mixed with getting drenched on the 3-block walk to the office. As for the clouds, or the fog, they were also talking about, I wasn't too worried. You see, I work in the Gemini Tower building, which means low-lying clouds and fog are actually below the floors where our offices are. Yeah, it's weird as shit to enter the elevators on a cold, rainy day with low-hanging clouds, only to emerge in the office with bright sunshine. It doesn't happen all the time, but enough times to still be a bit of magic, a subtle treat to add to a long day of work. So I guess you could say I was hoping for that bit of magic somewhere during the day. I kissed my wife goodbye and felt that slight pang of jealousy that she got to start later and sleep in. She muttered goodbye, and I turned to leave. When I got into the car, it was misting, but not raining too hard. I looked up into the sky on what would be my last day walking from my house to my car and saw nothing but clouds. Although it was dark, enough of the light from the suburbs and the city projected into the sky to light up those clouds. No stars, no moon. Dreary. The next hour and a half was the drive. If you've lived in a city, then you know what that's like. Stop and go, stop and go. Your foot almost goes numb from going gas to brake and back again. Your neck hurts from acceleration, then stopping. It's the kind of thing that when you leave home, you feel awake, but after more than an hour of stop and go, you feel exhausted and ready for a nap. Instead, there's no choice but to park the car in the garage and trudge 2 blocks to the office. The pavement was wet. The air off the lake was cold, slicing through me. From that point, it's the regular blue of the morning at work. Up to the top floors and out into that weird sunlight. There were still clouds, but the weather system was such that it was creating clouds lower to the ground, all of them moving quickly from over the water and rolling into the city. I used my keycard to get inside. Like most mornings, I was one of the first there. As I moved from the door to my desk, my movement set the lights overhead on, and I went to the wall to shut them back off. Although the sunlight was sort of milky from the higher clouds, it was still bright enough through the giant floor-to-ceiling windows that additional light was not needed. The shoulder bag went down, the laptop was plugged in, then to the restroom because my bladder can only go for so long, and that length is the traffic jam. By the time I'm done there, more people are coming in, and I stand in line to get the good coffee maker to make my cup. The usual chit-chat starts. The Gemini Tower is one of the tallest in the world. I work for a company that has floors 115 to 120. I work on floor 117. You'd think it would be fun to work in a place so tall, but once you get used to the views, which happens faster than you'd think, it's just another office with desks and laptops and computers and people working. Also, there are times you can feel the building sway in the wind. Sometimes the kitchen cabinets swing open on their own, or a pen will just start rolling across the desk. Such is life when you are this high up and your company thinks it's cool. You get used to it. You get used to a lot, really. People who live next to airports get used to the planes. So you stand there at the coffee maker and you talk about traffic and you talk about the TV show you watched last night. Then it's meetings. When you're in a business, you have meetings that are to prepare for other meetings. From one to the next, you just bounce and bounce. Some of our meetings are on the same floor as where my desk sits, and others are up several flights. But the world goes on hundreds of feet below you, and you barely even glance out the window. I tell you all of this because the 50-plus employees at Mitchell Dunn where I work all missed the fact that the really thick fog had rolled in off the lake. We had all talked about it at the coffee maker, dreading what it would do for traffic later, but no one even noticed. Part of it was because the fog was about a dozen floors or so below ours, and the sun was out where we were. It was maybe 10 o'clock before my manager Brent looked out his office window and said, "Hey man, the fog really came in." By then, I had forgotten all about the weather. I stood at the window and looked down. It was a view that always inspired me, but also at times made me a little nauseous. This time, about 10 to 12 floors below ours, there were just thick white clouds. Something beyond fog. There was no hint of the ground. When I looked up, there was the sun, with blue skies peeking from behind the high, thin cloud layer. I could see the winking silver shape of an airplane flying in the distance. Jesus, it's like the building just ends a few floors below us, I said, swallowing hard as if I had a lump in my throat. Something about this scene made me uncomfortable. There was an odd sensation in the back of my head, too, and I put a hand to my temple without even realizing I had done so. There's a weird thing that happens when you're so high in the air. The sounds of the street below, they do make their way up to the highest floors. The sounds are perhaps quieter than they would be lower down, but you can hear the sirens, the L trains, the people who think the busy downtown streets are the perfect place to drag race. Also, even though when you look straight out, you just see the tops of other buildings, but mostly the sky and the sun, there's an odd disconnect with the earth below. It's easy to fix this feeling by looking out the window and braving the look straight down. The long body of the tower stretching out below and attaching itself to the surface helps reestablish the connection to the planet. There was no connection to the ground at that moment. When I looked out the window, there was just our floor, a bit of the building, and then nothing. It felt like the top half of the tower had just floated away somewhere. I pressed my forehead against the glass, but could see nothing on the ground. There were no breaks in the clouds or fog or whatever the hell it was. I strained my ears too, but could not hear anything of what might have been happening on the street level. "So weird," I said. "It's like we're floating, and I can't even hear car horns or anything." Brent agreed it was weird, but he was already sitting down at his desk and had his computer on with the spreadsheet we were going over up on the display monitor. I put the clouds, the sounds, the weirdness out of my mind and sat down. I spent the next hour and a half in the meeting. It's funny how the mind works. One minute you're looking at a weird weather anomaly, and the next you're sitting there reviewing a project status spreadsheet and making updates. Humans have this amazing ability to compartmentalize so much. Once the meeting was done, it was back to my desk. My department was humming with clicking keyboards and people on various Teams meetings. Some of them had raised their desks into standing positions. Others were buried in the computer screens, especially those with desks right beside the windows. I put on the noise-canceling headphones and got back to work. Those are amazing things, the noise-canceling headphones. They actually create frequencies within them that negate the outside sound. When you flick that button, all of the world around you sort of vanishes. Then the music you turn on fills your head, and it is so easy to get lost. This is what happened to me and why I jumped about 6 feet out of my skin when Curtis, my desk neighbor, tapped me on the shoulder hours later. "Jesus, I'm sorry." he said, holding a hand to his chest and laughing. I removed the headphones. Yeah, noise canceling. When I am in there, I am gone. What's up? A bunch of us were going to head down and get lunch in about 15 minutes. I was wondering if you wanted to go with us. I looked up and realized most of my team was looking back at us. I brought my lunch, I said. Thanks. Hey, what's the weather like out there? Curtis shrugged. I don't know. You know what it's like up here. Looks like the sun's out up here, but I have no idea what's happening down below. I cast a gaze out the window. There were the high clouds, just like before. There was the blue sky, and over there was the sun. When I craned my neck, I could see the ocean of white clouds stretching out in all directions. I think I'll just head up to the lunchroom and eat here. You guys have fun. Let me know if it's raining down there. I realized my bladder was full and got up to walk around to the other side of the floor where the restrooms were. I walked past our account team. Several of them looked up and waved, but most of them were on calls. I hooked a left, and there was the creative department, mocking up ads and campaigns, while copywriters tapped away on keyboards. The same view of nothing but blue sky and oceans of clouds were there too. Jared, one of the copywriters, looked up from his screen and gave a wave. Weird weather out there, right? Yeah, I replied. Hey, where's Margaret and Sunny? In fact, where are a bunch of you guys over here? Jared looked around. Yeah, they had to head off to a client meeting. That was this morning, though. Funny, I thought they'd be back by now. I shrugged. You know how client meetings go sometimes. Of course, when you look back on those conversations, you wonder why you couldn't see that something was weird, something was wrong. I went to the restroom, then back to the kitchen. I was pouring water when Lane stepped in there with me, also looking for water. You going out to lunch too? I asked. Lane shook her head. Nah, I have too much work to do. Is Jake going out? I asked. Lane and Jake had been dating for a while now. I think so, but I told him to just bring something back for me. Lane had intense blue eyes surrounded by long dark hair. Sometimes she appeared to be looking straight through you to some spot at the back of your brain, or perhaps on the wall behind you. In short, she was really good at reading people. You seem a little weirded out or something, she said, filling her water bottle. I don't know, just a weird feeling. You see the weather out there? Doesn't it seem so strange that it's sunny up here, but you can't even see the ground? She shrugged. I don't know, never noticed before. I guess it's a little weird. They're just clouds. I was just talking to Jared, and a bunch of the creatives over there had a meeting this morning at a client's office. They haven't come back yet. Were they supposed to be back? He made it seem like they were, I replied, then took a long drink of water. My mouth was suddenly dry, and the feeling something was very wrong had grown stronger. I thought I saw some concern cross Lane's face, but it was there and gone right away. Well, what's on the news? We have TVs here. I wanted to smack my palm against my forehead. Of course, the flat screens in the kitchen often just showed information from the company, but there were remotes, and one could turn to the local news channel and get information. On occasion, soap operas were left running even when clients stopped by for a visit. Not really something the upper managers wanted, but it was the employee kitchen. Lane was already fishing around for the remote. I felt like I was moving and thinking in slow motion. She hit the buttons and turned the TV on, then began zooming around from one menu to another, before finding the local streaming service and clicking to the local news. The screen turned black for a moment, then stayed that way much longer than normal. Finally, green letters appeared as if from nothing. No signal. Was all Lane had to say. She pushed more buttons and tried a different channel that should have had news. Nothing. This is weird. The other cable channels, the ones not broadcast locally, were showing their shows right now. Eventually, she got to a national news channel and stopped, but they were too busy talking about politics. We watched and waited for a bit, and eventually, even that signal began to fade. No signal. This is weird, Lane stated more to herself than to me. Yeah, I agreed. Just then, Brent rounded the corner, carrying his gigantic bottle of water. He waved at the two of us. "Hey crew, what's up?" Lane spoke up first, before I could formulate a thought. "We can't get any of the local news channels here. A group of people went out this morning to a client site and haven't come back, even though they should have. Now, even the national channels here on the TV are starting to go black." Brett made a noise, but went about rinsing and refilling his bottle. He leaned back against the sink. "Well, maybe there's just a problem with the Wi-Fi," he said, reaching for the remote which Lane handed to him. We watched as Brent tried a number of channels. CNN, Fox, MSNBC were all blacked out now. I felt the sense of dread within me grow. "Well, it's strange, but I don't know if this is anything out of the ordinary," Brent said. He gathered up his water bottle and started to head back. "Guys, I wouldn't worry about this. It's just a glitch." Then he was gone. Lane furrowed her brow, looking more concerned than I had seen her look before, but eventually she shook her head and smiled. "Hey, it's weird, but this is not earth-shattering." "Well, maybe don't let Jake or the others head out for lunch." She turned her head and gave me a weird look. "I think you're overreacting a little." I shrugged. "Maybe, I guess. Still, there must be something we can do for lunch right here." Lane laughed and continued on her way back to her desk. Of course, no one was going to have my level of paranoia. I was a weirdo who always thought the worst, right? I pulled out my phone and called up my radio app. This allowed me to listen to music and radio streams from stations around the world, but also local ones. I searched for a local station, called it up, hit play, and waited. I got an error and was told the station was not currently streaming. I tried again, got the same thing. When I tried another city, this one hundreds of miles away, the music came through for a while, before once again fading out and then giving me an error. I wished I had an actual radio. The weird thing was, when you were right downtown and near where the radio towers were, the radio reception was much worse. Still, internet and digital connections sometimes failed. I headed out of the kitchen and back to my desk, but I didn't sit down. I looked out the window. I studied the sea of clouds and fog which I could see stretched out over the lake, obliterating it from view. It was moving like water, like the lake itself, but it never stopped. Other buildings' rooftops were also visible. A few of them had the final couple of floors poking out from the clouds, but most of those top floors were for maintenance purposes. Mostly, there were the antennas. Because they were still standing, I wished again for an actual radio. I drifted closer to the window and looked down at the tops of the other buildings sticking up from all that white. I thought I saw, on a building a couple of blocks away, people standing on the roof. I leaned closer to the window, and a large white cloud swept past the roof of the distant building. When the cloud passed, the rooftop was empty again. I was sure I'd been imagining things. I hoped I was. Curtis stood up behind me. I could see his reflection in the window as he shrugged his jacket on. "Hey, Curtis, is there any way you guys could try to have lunch here instead?" I asked. Curtis gave me an odd look. "Why would we do that? And no, I didn't bring my lunch with me. It's not like there's a restaurant on one of the upper floors." That was a fair point. How the hell was I going to get them lunch up here? The alternative was to try and have food delivered, but I had this growing, dreadful feeling that was not going to happen either. I had nothing to stand on save for the floor, and I felt something was very wrong. I watched as several other members of my team got to their feet and started putting their coats on. My anxiety levels were shooting through the roof, but I could do nothing but watch. Jake, Todd, Mary, Jean, Peter, all headed for the door as a group. I wanted to block the door. Instead, I sat back down at my desk. Just a couple of minutes later, I heard someone from the hallway let out a yell of pure disgust. Disgust and horror. I was up like a shot and ran for the door. All of them were crowded around an open elevator door. Todd held the door open while several others peeped inside. Mary stood off to one side, looking sick. I pushed through without even thinking about the others. I had to see. When I got to the open door, I gasped. From floor to ceiling, the elevator car was covered in crimson droplets, as if someone had used a spray bottle filled with red liquid. One sniff of the coppery smell within, and I knew it was blood. As if someone were vaporized, I whispered. Todd nodded slowly. What the fuck is happening here? It was Brent who finally rounded up everyone from our floor, said there appeared to be a problem, and suggested we go up 4 floors to the larger kitchen area. Needless to say, we took the stairs. Most of the people were pissed off. A few looked confused. Only those of us who had seen the elevator and the mess inside looked like a mixture of afraid and nauseous. Brent waited for people to quiet down a bit before he started speaking. Thanks for coming up here with us. I'm sorry to pull you all away from whatever you were working on. Something has happened, and we're a little concerned about the elevators and going down to the street level. That created more than a murmur. Several people laughed. I think I saw Jared make an exasperated face and wave his hand, sneering. I instantly, in my mind, saw dozens of them head for the elevators to go down to street level. I imagined all of them turning into red mist, or whatever the hell was happening. Hey, let's calm down. Something weird is going on with these clouds or this fog or whatever it is, I stated. I know how crazy that sounds, but I can't get any local radio or TV station to work on our TVs or my phone. Then we saw one of the elevators. It was covered in blood. This was met with more derision and doubt. I looked at Brent and shrugged. Maybe I pushed too far? I tried to convey the question to him via my shrug. Brent looked down at the floor for a moment, gathering his thoughts. After the moment had passed, he held up his hand. Okay, you want to see? Come with me. He headed back towards the door to the hallway leading to the elevators. The rest of us stood there for a fraction of a second before following after him, and we all clustered, cramped and aggravated, in the hall. Brent hit the button, and we all stood there staring at each other. Someone muttered something like, "This is ridiculous," but they did not say it very loudly. No one knew what to expect, except for those of us who had seen other elevators. Eventually, one of the cars behind us dinged and slid open. The smell that wafted out was instantaneous. Someone gagged. Others covered their mouths and noses. Perhaps this had been an earlier event, and sitting in the elevator had caused the smell to permeate even further. My guess is the first elevator we saw had contained only 1, maybe 2 people, but this one had been a full car. The smell of blood hit us hard, is what I'm saying. One by one, or in groups of 3 or 4, the others all peered into the car. I didn't want to look, but my better instincts lost out, and eventually I peeked in too. The elevator was covered in dripping red liquid. It was as if someone went berserk with a paint sprayer. The blood had turned very dark, coagulating in a lot of places, but still dripping and wet in a few others. The floor looked slick with it, save for the odd outlines of people's feet. 5 people. That's how many stood in here, and how many were vaporized. What the fuck is this? It was Jared again, still shaking his head, trying hard to deny what his eyes were telling him, but at the same time, his eyes were wide in what could only be described as pure terror. What kind of game are you playing? Not a game, I replied quietly. This is real. This is what we saw in the other elevator over there. I pointed to one of the cars at the other end of the elevator bank. Why should I believe you? Jared asked. How do I know this isn't all some elaborate prank? We can stand here for hours and try to get every elevator to come up here, Brent interjected. Or we could all sit here and try to figure out what's happened and what we can do about it. Everyone stood there mutely. No one really wanted to do either of those options, but no one wanted to make the first move. "Let's all head back to the kitchen so we can talk," Brent said. The elevator closed, and the machines that raised and lowered it kicked into action. We all shambled back to the kitchen and found seats again. Now, before I came up here, and after being told no one could get radio stations through online streaming, I tried getting a few using the stereo in my office. Brent always had a way of speaking steadily and deliberately. I got a steady hiss across both the AM and FM bands. Jared chuffed and sneered. A few others laughed nervously. What does that mean? Someone far in the back, near more large floor-to-ceiling windows, asked this, but I couldn't tell exactly whom. "It means something's going on with that fog out there," I said, looking down at my feet because I could not bring myself to look into their eyes as I suggested it. "I think there's something in the fog." I could feel Jared's sneer from where I stood. "There's no thing in any fog anywhere that could do what we just saw in there. This has to be a hoax, people. This is a fucking joke." Brent's voice remained calm. This was a good thing because I was about to start yelling. "Jared, please. Can we talk civilly here about this situation? I can only assure you that we are not pulling some hoax. There appears to be some kind of strange phenomenon happening. I don't know what, and maybe it's something that has never happened before. I just have to go by what I've seen and the evidence before you. I understand you spoke to one of my team this morning about a group who left earlier today to visit a client site. They haven't come back, is that correct?" There was an awkward silence, and I finally raised my head. Jared stood there with his face turning red, making his beard stand out even further. I could see his jaw working while he tried to come up with something to say in response. "Just because," he started and then stopped. "Just because a team got held up at a client site does not mean we have a vaporizing fog." Brent tented his fingers and brought them thoughtfully to his chin, nodding very slightly. "Okay then, Jared, if you feel this strongly, prove us wrong. I challenge you to go call the elevators again and take it down to the first floor. If you make it, I'll admit how stupid all of this was, and we'll do what we can to get the building maintenance crew here to clean up the elevators." Jared's face turned a darker shade of red. He tried to speak, but the words must have failed him. Instead, he adjusted his baseball cap and sat back down. "There's no need to be rude," he muttered. Brent nodded. "Exactly. So, what are our options here? Has anyone here tried to call anyone outside of downtown, or received a call?" Everyone took turns staring at each other and looking sheepish. There were a few shrugs and some shaking heads. A few people muttered no. Brent clapped his hands together. "Well, this seems like a good place to start. Everyone, get your phone out and try calling someone. I don't care who. Call your mom, call your wife or girlfriend. Let's just see what happens." I pulled out my phone and with shaking hands tried to call my wife. I was mad I hadn't thought about this before, but at the same time, I had been afraid to try calling her and getting no answer. She worked at least an hour's drive from where I was. Maybe the weird fog hadn't reached her. There had been plenty of times in the past the fog would roll in off the lake and just couch the entire downtown area in fog, but nowhere else. We also often got rain or snow due to the lake when no one else outside of the city got it. I found her number and hit the little phone icon. I put the phone to my ear, then walked away from the group. I strode past the large windows that extended high over my head, trying to keep calm and also avoid looking at the clouds below. The phone rang and rang. Then, to my delight, she picked up.
"Hello?"
She asked. "Babe, hey, look, I don't have a lot of time, but can you get to a window? Can you look outside and tell me what's going on?"
"What's wrong? What are you talking about?"
I could tell I was irritating her already. She was very busy, and I was interrupting. She was out near a major airport, and although her building was 4 floors up from the ground, it was only 4 floors. "Please, just do it. Stay on the phone and go to a window." She sighed and got up. I heard her walking. She muttered something under her breath. There was a burst of static from either her phone or mine, then more static. Eventually, she stopped, sighed again.
Okay, I'm out a window. What do you want me to be looking for?
"Is there fog?" I asked. She paused.
Well, it's gray and cloudy. Wait a second. Hey, look at that.
I felt my heart stop. I clutched at my chest. "What?"
Looks like white clouds coming down the road. What the hell is this?
We had both seen fog roll in over the large areas of the airport nearby where she worked. All of that open space made a perfect mixture of atmosphere to create fog at times. Jane kept talking. No fear in her voice, but confusion and questions.
What is this? Is this what's happening downtown? It's getting closer. Jesus, you can't see anything through it once it passes over something.
I began to panic. What could she do? If she ran, how far would she get? "How high is it?" I asked.
It's tall. It's completely covering the buildings and houses. Oh my god, babe, what is this?
What could I say? What could I tell her? A high-pitched sound began to emanate from my phone. "Run!" I finally yelled. "Try to get away. I love you." I heard her say something that I choose to believe was her saying she loved me too. The shriek in my ear got so loud I yanked the phone away from my ear and it fell from my fingers. I screamed in frustration and fell to my knees. The tears flowed hot and useless down my face. When I reached out and picked up my phone, there was nothing. The screen didn't light up. The phone was dead. It was just a completely useless hunk of plastic and glass. I don't remember how long it took me to calm down. It felt like a long time. Eventually, someone put their arms around me and helped me to my feet. We headed back towards the kitchen area. Brent looked shaken as he got to the front of the room. Others were crying. I apparently was not the only one who got through to someone, and not the only one for their lives to end on the call. "Okay, who got through to someone?" Brent asked. Roughly 10 people raised their hands. "What happened?" "I got my wife. She was at work." I started without being asked. I told them what I heard. I told them about her running and the clouds and then everything shutting off. Somewhere near the end, the tears came and my voice caught in my throat and I started weeping again. "Thank you," Brent said quietly and adjusted his glasses. "I was not able to get a hold of my wife. We only live a few blocks from here. Anyone else?" A few others volunteered. Those who got in contact with parents, spouses, loved ones, and friends all told various versions of my story. In each case, the white clouds rolled down streets and over the tops of houses and small buildings like something alive and hungry. Then there was static, and then nothing. We all sat in silence. All who had spoken were now in tears. I felt numb now, unable to process any more of this. "Jared?" Brent asked. "What about you?" Jared had been staring past all of us at the windows behind. His eyes held no emotion, and he blinked when Brent called on him. "No," he said. "I didn't get a hold of my wife or anyone." His eyes refocused. "But that doesn't mean anything. She might have been taking the kids to school or at work. She might be busy." "Can you admit something is happening and it's probably dangerous?" Brent asked, his voice low. Jared shrugged. "I don't know. It's weird. That's all I'll say." "Anyone else still having doubts? You're free to leave if you do." No one else said a thing. We were all too lost. "Okay then," Brent continued. "I suggest we all stay here then. There's some leftovers from the big client party the other day in the fridge. We can all eat. You can stay up here with us. Hell, you can go back down and work if you really want. Let's see if these clouds or this fog or whatever it is blows over. Then we can meet back here at, say, 4:30 and see if we all just go home or what our next step should be." No one wanted to work. but a few people headed for the stairs to head back down. I moved to the south side of the floor we were in and sank deep into one of the soft leather chairs. This was one of the so-called breakout areas where people could come to work and be by themselves. Behind the chair was a flat-screen TV, but it was currently showing the internal company video on a loop. Cheery music would play from time to time, and some utterly banal corporate executive would speak about how great their department was. I wondered how many of them were dead now. While Brent wanted to keep people positive and hold some form of cheery outlook when talking to the group, I knew my wife was gone. I knew that everyone below us was dead. The pain of that realization was almost too much to bear. I put my head in my hands and turned the chair toward the wall so I could weep some more in relative peace. The company I worked for provided a number of solutions for businesses. We had offices downtown here in the super tall building, but the main HQ was well north in a much more modest building. I imagined it now buried in the thick white cloud layer. Spatters of blood all over the walls and windows. Eerie silence through the halls. Music still playing through headphones that no longer contained a head. I wondered what would happen if the clouds had not vanished by tonight. We'd all be sleeping here, I guessed. And then what? If it was still there tomorrow, what then? Leftover pizza would only last so long. It was all too much to worry about or deal with. Instead, I curled my legs up to my chest and tried to just blend in with the chair as much as possible. I really wanted shock to set in so I could just shut my brain off, but that wasn't going to happen. The memories came, and I could not hold them back, which triggered more tears and more than a little bit of sobbing. I met my wife the very modern way, via a dating website. However, the moment I saw her, I knew she was the woman I would want to be with for the rest of my life. Her eyes were the ones I wanted to look into until time and whatever else came along took that ability away. I'd never met anyone so smart, so witty, and so beautiful in my entire life. Once I kissed her in a parking lot in February while shivering, I knew no other lips would ever do for kissing. She was my partner. She was my best friend. We fought like cats and dogs at times, but life without her, I could not imagine. I never thought killer fog would be the end of all that. Of course, if the fog didn't lift, then maybe I would be joining her soon. A hand fell on my shoulder, and I jumped a bit. When I turned around, it was Jaina, one of the designers on the creative side. She was usually the one who laughed the loudest and longest. Whenever there was a meeting or gathering, if you were unsure where it was, listen for the sound of Jaina's laugh. She'd guide you right to it. None of that mirth was on her face right now. In fact, she looked tired. "Are you okay?" she asked. "Not really. You?" "I tried to call my mom but didn't get an answer. I'm terrified." I spun the chair around, and Jaina took the one next to it. We did our best, both of us, not to look out the window. It was nearly impossible, however, and I could see the rolling clouds below us. The sky overhead was turning into that late afternoon shade. Before too long, the sun would start descending, and then the stars would come out. I assumed they'd be bright and unobstructed from here. "What is this?" she asked. "I mean, I know you don't know for sure, but do you know of anything like this happening before?" I was the collector of the weird and the macabre. I had horror novels on my desk instead of books about business. I also had a collection of figurines and bobbleheads featuring prominent actors and characters in horror movies. It was well known if you needed something weird, creepy, or scary, you asked me. There have been fogs before. Hell, there have even been killer smogs before, I replied. There was a particularly bad one in London once where the air quality was so bad it killed dozens, maybe hundreds of people. However, I've never heard of one leaving sprees of blood across an elevator. What do you think has happened to all of the people down there? Jaina indicated the rest of the world with a nod of her head. I don't know, Jaina. Sorry, I wish I did. I'm trying to keep my emotions and imagination in check. Maybe they just vaporize? Jaina bit her lower lip, and I saw tears stream down her face. Everyone here, I thought, everyone here has lost someone. And since not one of us knew how far the fog went, or if there was fog in other places, the losses were going to mount. How many towers would be tall enough for part of it to extend higher than this fog? Across the globe, just a handful. Maybe a few tall mountains that still had people living in the area. If what I thought was true, then the population of the entire planet had just dropped to a few thousand at best, instead of billions. As for those people, how long would they survive? The office people like us might be able to survive for a few days, maybe a couple weeks. I had images of office workers eventually resorting to cannibalism, but did my best to push the image of bloody mouths and tearing flesh away. The mountain folks might have crops of some sort, or animals they eat anyway. Isolated communities like that had found ways to survive and thrive while remaining isolated. The big question was, what would happen? Would the fog lift? Then what? The world rebuild itself, but with thousands upon thousands of empty buildings coated with blood? I can see your mind working, Jaina said, wiping away the tears. You aren't having much success closing down that imagination. No, I'm not. The thoughts come too hard and too fast. I gave a sad smile and shrugged. People think I'm emotionless. When funerals and tragedies happen, I tend to shut down the emotion. It's not because I don't feel anything, but because I feel too many things. The only way to process the situation is for my brain to act like a traffic cop and let some emotions out at the right time. I tend to weep and bawl in private. My imagination is a blessing, but also a curse. Jaina and I fell silent. What else was there to say? At some point, I heard her breathing more heavily and realized she had fallen asleep. By the looks of it, it was not a deep or restful sleep, however. I wondered if I would be able to do the same. I was never the type to easily fall asleep in places like airplanes. However, I could always find a way to fall asleep in other unlikely locations, for example, a dentist's chair. The brain is a strange thing. The light was definitely getting dimmer. Just for kicks, and just to terrorize me all the more, my mind wondered if the sun would vanish below the horizon, only to vanish like people all did when they went below the cloud layer. It was silly, of course, since the sun was so far away, but if the foggy clouds could cover the planet, why not just stretch out into space and start eating the universe itself? I decided it was time to stretch my legs. I was willing to risk losing the comfy seat to stroll around the floor. Most people had decided to stay up here, but they were all scattered. I saw Lane and Jake next to each other in one far corner. Jared sat at the table in the kitchen, staring alternately at his phone, then the blank television screen which, as of right now, was not even running the corporate bullshit video on a loop. It was eerily quiet. I decided to head around the back, down a hall, into an area of desks facing north, away from the kitchen. I found Brent at the far end, hands on his hips, staring at the endless clouds below like a man watching the ocean. There were others here too, but most of them were reading or had their heads down on the desks, perhaps sleeping. Shock was setting in on some people. The mind can only take so much before it starts to shut down, trying desperately to block out what is happening. This was unreal and unfathomable, so there was no way to process it. "What do you think, Brent?" I asked, standing next to him. His eyes burned intently from behind his glasses at the clouds below. I did not see any sign he had been in tears, nor was there a sign of him shutting his brain down. His jaw worked back and forth, as if he were chewing on something, and it took a few moments before he spoke. "I think the clouds are slowly getting higher," he said at last, but in a flat tone that did nothing to ease the horrible news he had just delivered. "What?" was all I could think of to ask. "I've been watching the fog bank or cloud bank or whatever for a while now. See that antenna sticking up over there? He pointed, and I nodded that I could see. When I first started standing here, I could see the entire thing. I could even see parts of the rooftop. For a moment, I even thought I saw people up there. I remembered how I had also thought I saw people on the tops of one of the buildings. How a wave of clouds hit them and they seemed to vanish. What had brought them up to the roof? How had they known what was going on? How long had chaos and death been filling the streets below us before we knew anything about it on the upper floors? Do you think the clouds are just going to keep climbing until they reach us? I'm not sure. Maybe it was just like a kind of wave, I said, although I had little hope as I spoke. You know how that goes when you're in the ocean? It's all small waves, and then suddenly a big one hits and knocks you over. Brent produced an odd, crooked smile, which seemed very out of place here and now. Seems we have competing hypotheses. Either one leads to all of us here dying. Brent was a lot of things. He was a man who thought in direct, computer-like terms. Like a man from the Dune novels, he was about as close to a human computer as you got. He was sharp. He was also funny and willing to listen. He was a lot of things, but overtly negative was not one of them. If he was saying something that grim, then things were really bad. Jesus, don't sugarcoat it or anything, I said, and don't let anyone else hear you say that. Brent nodded slowly. I just think you and I need to be practical here. We've got our own problems right here. Jared's going to be an issue, I replied. Yeah, before long he's going to try to leave, and he might bring some people with him. I affirmed this was my thought as well. I'm not going to try and stop him. I mean, if the clouds are crawling up the building, doesn't really matter for any of us, right? But I would like to find out what's happening. So, when Jared decides to lead his half-assed rebellion, I'm going to see if he'll turn on his phone. Maybe he can live stream what happens when they go down in the elevator or take the stairs or whatever he tries to do. Jesus, you're cold, Brent. He tilted his head to the side, the crooked smile back on his face. Just trying to gain information. Do you think there's something we can learn from this? Something that will let us survive? I doubt it, but there's something nagging at me. If this fog or clouds attack organic material, flesh, then why were there no clothes or items in the elevator? I almost asked what, but then stopped. Sure enough, there was blood, which is organic matter, but there were no empty pants or shoes or a pair of glasses. Maybe it has something to do with the things touching the organic matter? I suggested. Possible. But cell phones and pockets, or wallets, or even pocket change are not touching organic anything. They're just touching the fabric of the clothing. If this thing devoured anything non-organic, we'd already be dead, because it would eat away the building below the cloud layer, and we'd just fall over. At the very least, the elevators would just be cables with nothing at the end of them, right? I had to admit this made some sort of sense. What do you actually think this fog is, then? I'm not sure, but I half wonder if there's a consciousness behind it. It's like a living thing, reaching up the side of the building for us. It's eating people, but doesn't care about the clothes or the items in pockets, small things. But I bet below those clouds, there are empty cars filled with blood. It's a messy eater, leaving a spray of blood, but everything else just goes. Jesus. Not him, no. Brent joked. But something. Where the fuck did this come from? I muttered this more to myself than to him, but Brent answered anyway. We'll probably never know. But if it is something alive, there is one very, very, very slim hope we can cling to. Something alive can be made dead. We leave this group for the moment, to puzzle over the fact that they, perched high above the clouds, may be the only living people left in the world. An exercise in terror that is all too familiar when the night comes out. The rest of that afternoon and evening passed in a weird haze. Eventually, food was passed out, but there were already attempts at rationing. I ate whatever food was handed to me, but in an automatic, robotic way where I barely tasted it. I sat in the easy chair and stared out the window. Did the clouds look higher? Did Brent have a point? Jared sat at one of the tables in the kitchen and stared at his phone, also eating in an automatic way. His face, however, got me worried. He looked mad instead of scared. His skin was red, his mouth a steady line with almost no color. I wondered who else would finally decide they'd had enough and leave. Everyone else seemed too afraid or in shock. However, if the clouds were still there tomorrow with no let-up, this peace would not last. The moon rose slowly, peering over the tops of the clouds. It was nearly full, and it cast a cool light across the vast whiteness of the clouds below. It was eerie, to say the least. And the clouds kept rolling along, moving as a steady mass without breaks or thinning. I was tempted to head back down to the floor with my desk, but I was not feeling the stairs. Instead, I fell asleep in the easy chair with my head back and mouth open. As I dozed off, my body and mind just shutting down because there was nothing else to do, I heard some people weeping softly. I heard soft moans, too, and wondered who decided now was the perfect time to engage in sexual relations, but really, who could blame them? Soon, I was in a dream. As you might imagine, the dream was not pleasant. Within it, the top of the building had detached from the bottom and floated above an endless sea of clouds. Except that when you looked down at that sea, there were shapes and shadows of things within. Creatures with tentacles and teeth occasionally popped their heads up over the clouds like giant fish and snapped at the bottom of the top floors we were in. We floated around the world, and there was nothing but clouds and the weird creatures casting shadows. No airplanes, helicopters, or other buildings. When I turned to see all of us standing at the windows, everyone on the top floors was a walking skeleton. The skin was pulled tight across their bones, eyes sunken, teeth visible from lips stretched tight. No one could speak, just make those sounds you heard zombies make in the movies. All of us stood in front of the large windows, with nowhere to go, no food to eat, nothing to do, just standing there, starving to death. And when I saw my own reflection, I saw that I was just as much of a walking skeleton as the rest of them. At some point within the dream, the top floors began to ascend. Higher and higher, the sky got darker and darker until we managed to drift off into space. An odd spaceship that was just about 50 floors of a skyscraper with no bottom spun around until we could look back at the planet we had left. As the temperature within dropped and the oxygen vanished, we choked and gasped, but studied the earth behind us. It was covered in clouds, and the shapes moved within, larger now. They were planet-sized creatures. Behind the planet was a huge mouth, covered in rows of teeth, as if ready to bite into the earth like an apple. And as this mouth exhaled, the clouds came forth, covering everything within, stretching out into space now. Behind the mouth were eyes. Yellow eyes, filled with such evil that it would cause any person who saw it to go insane. I snapped awake, my heart pounding, and for a moment I thought the building really was moving. It took a few seconds for me to remember where I was and why. We were not in space, not floating, but the nightmare of real life was just as bad as the dream. Bad dream? I heard a voice ask over my shoulder. It was Jessie, one of our account team. Tall, with long blonde hair, she was statuesque in a way you were no longer allowed to talk about a person in a working environment. I always had the suspicion she didn't like me for some reason, but always guessed it was probably due to the age difference. I could not relate to some of the young people. She looked frightened and had taken up the other easy chair where Jaina had been earlier. Yeah, a bad one. She nodded slowly, her face lit by the moon, which was near the top of the windows now, but still visible. Beyond her, the clouds moved on in an endless sort of tide. I had a few too, she admitted. I keep staring at the clouds. They never break. Never once. I can't remember ever seeing clouds do that before, not even on the rainiest of days. Brent thinks the clouds are some kind of living creature, I whispered. Something hungry. Jessie gave a soft laugh. And what do you think? I think any theory works when the thing that has never happened before happens. Jessie seemed to think about this for a while. Then she pulled her legs up onto the chair and turned back toward the window. I just hope I don't starve to death, she said. That's gotta be the worst way to go. Whatever this is, and however it kills you, it has to be better than that. She said nothing else, and I had no response. I stared out the window, noting the stars and remembering my dream. Eventually, I heard heavy breathing from Jessie and realized she had fallen asleep. I could hear others breathing heavily too. Just before sleep got me too, I realized if Jared decided to head down tomorrow, Jessie would probably go with him. Day 2. I awoke to noise, voices, talking excitedly and angrily. There had been more troubled and troubling dreams throughout the night, but they evaporated once I opened my eyes. Once again, with my eyes open, I couldn't remember where I was or what was happening, so I flailed around and promptly fell over onto the floor, the chair on my back. The sounds came into focus. I distinctly heard Jared's voice, and he was angry. Not a big surprise. There were other voices, merged into a cacophony of sound. I tried to say something, but found I was out of breath, struggling to get to my feet. Once I got upright, I looked around. The sun was still down below the layer of clouds, but the edge of the horizon was brightening with the oncoming sun. There were still no breaks in the clouds. I could see the tops of some of the other buildings, however, so I was slightly encouraged that they were not getting higher. Not that it would do much good if we couldn't ever get down. I staggered my way toward the kitchen. I found a crowd of about 15 people. Jared was in the middle, his legs apart in a fighter stance. Brent stood there with his hands out in front of him, as if trying to calm him. There was a clear delineation between sides here. On Jared's side were Curtis and, as I suspected, Jessie, plus a few others. Maybe a total of 7 people. The rest of the group, including Peter, who stood behind Brent like he was literally holding him up, were on the other side of the kitchen. The people behind Jared looked angry and determined. Those behind Brent still looked in shock and scared. Brent, so help me God, if you start spewing the same bullshit you always do, I'm gonna clock you and knock you right the fuck out, Jared said, spittle flying from his lips. Okay, Jared, look, I know you want to try leaving. I get that. There's nothing I can do to stop you. I just want to know if you'd be willing to use your phone so we can watch. If you make it down, then we can all leave. Brent had managed to explain his plan quite easily and quickly. Jared cast a quick glance behind him to see how much of a crowd he had managed to gather. I'm not participating in some experiment. Besides, I thought the phones weren't working. If we use the building Wi-Fi and someone FaceTimes me, I think it will be able to provide us with a clear shot of what's happening. Brent was remarkably calm. He lowered his hand. If not you, then one of your followers. Fuck you, Brent. Are you gonna stand aside and let us pass? Jared asked. I'll do it. It was Jessie. She stepped forward and handed Brent her phone. He did a few taps of the screen, then answered his own phone. They were connected, and he could see whatever Jessie's phone camera was showing. Jared, I said as quietly and calmly as I could. Why do you want to leave now? The sun's not even up yet. Maybe just wait. I'm through waiting. Jared replied. We've sat here all goddamn night based on a theory no one has proven. Brent just talks, and there was an elevator with what might have been blood in it. There's been no news. There's been nothing. I'm not gonna sit here staring at this room for another fucking day. I need to get home to my family. I've already talked to him, Brent answered. We've been talking for a while now. Jared and his team here, they're all sure this is the right move. I don't think we're going to convince them otherwise. I looked at Jessie. Are you sure you want to do this? I asked. I don't want to sit here and starve to death, she answered. If something's going to happen, then let it happen. I want this over with. I nodded and sighed. Okay, sorry for interrupting. I got here late. Jared put his hands down and stopped standing like a bare-knuckle boxer. His face was red and sweat ran down his face. He chewed his lower lip. He did not look like a man trying to lead a revolution. Okay, then let us through, he said. If we get to the bottom without any trouble, you'll see it and come down, right? Brent and I nodded at the same time. The group of 7 moved past us, headed for the glass doors and the elevators. All of them looked nervous, with the possible exception of Jessie. Given how she spoke to me the night before, she just seemed to resign herself to the fact she would either make it or not. I felt bad that she felt that way, but it was hard to argue. They all reached the elevator, and Jared hit the button. We all stood there and watched, unsure of what to say or do. The 7 looked back at us, but no one said a thing. Given how surreal the entire event had been, this incident was somehow even more so. Eventually, after what seemed like an eternity, an elevator arrived, dinging loudly in the silence. One of the elevators in the middle opened. When it did, several of the 7 stepped back a bit, and looks of utter disgust crossed their faces. We're going, Jared announced, swallowing hard. One by one, they entered the elevator. The last one to enter was Jessie. She cast one quick glance my way, and then entered as well. I felt my stomach drop as the door closed. Jesus, I whispered. Brent was back in the kitchen, and he was already broadcasting the FaceTime call to one of the monitors on the wall. Jessie was holding the phone close to her chest, and I could see the walls and the elevator door. It was sprayed with blood, just like the rest of them had been. Oh God, it reeks in here, one of the 7 declared, but I couldn't recognize the voice. Shut up, Jared snarled. The door shut, and he pressed the number 1 button for the bottom floor. The elevator got really silent. Jessie pointed the phone camera so we could see the door, some shapes of the others around the side, and the floor indicator in the upper right. I felt slightly faint as I watched those numbers descend. I realized I'd been holding my breath. I looked around at the others, and all of us were locked to the screen. The only one who didn't seem to be showing much emotion was Brent. There was nothing from the elevator feed for some time. The numbers just kept going down. 80, 79, 78, 77, 76. How much further, I wondered. How long before they reached the cloud layer? Hey, I feel kinda weird, a male voice said from the elevator crew. Me too, Jessie said, but she did not sound panicked. 73, 72, 71, 70, 69. The rest of the 7 started to talk. I feel so strange. My arms are tingling. What the fuck is this? Jared, sounding stressed, cried. Just shut up. It's all in your mind. No, this is something else. What is this? It hurts. I think that might have been Peter. This time it was Jessie, the cry of pain loud against the microphone of her phone. Oh my God. Oh my God. Jared managed to say, but then one of the shapes off to the side seemed to crumple a bit. Jessie held onto her phone and turned it, just as Jared's entire body turned into mist. 1 second it was there, fully dressed, bent over slightly as if in pain. And then there was a kind of tearing sound. His clothes, hat, everything about him just vanished, and there was a spray of blood which coated the camera on the phone.
"Stop the elevator,"
Peter cried. Others were crying out now too.
"Stop it! Stop it!"
Jessie let out a long scream, and then it stopped. The phone went blank. We all stood there, looking at a black screen in the kitchen. We all stood there, unsure of what to do. Then Jennifer, one of the designers, made a retching noise and ran for the nearest garbage can. We could all hear her loudly throwing up whatever leftovers she had eaten so far that morning. "Jesus," I said, unable to come up with something more profound. I turned my head and looked at Brent. His hand was up to his mouth, his eyes staring intently at the dark screen, but there was nothing etched in his face to indicate what he was feeling. "Brent?" I asked. He blinked and turned his gaze towards me. I could see tears stood out against his eyeballs, but they were apparently having an issue falling from them. "Yes? What do you think?" Brent shook his head very slowly, as if his neck were on a rusty old hinge. "I don't know yet. Nothing in my head is good." "Do you think this is really alive? Do you still hold to that theory?" I realized I was talking a little too fast. I was trying hard to hold on, but memories of what I heard with my wife were running in my head, and now I had bloody visuals to go with the sounds. Brent didn't answer. He stood up. "I need to go think," he said. Then he walked off, then around the corner. I assumed he was heading back to his window. I just stood there and had this sense of vertigo and unreality wash over me. I felt sure that the building was tilting to one side. I felt sick, too. What was there to do now? All of us remaining on the floor just stood there in shock. The immediate reaction was that we were all going to die. A lot of realizations probably slammed home all at once. The fact we had limited food and no way to go down to the street and get more being one of the prominent ones. "Jesus," I whispered. I realized there were others looking at me. With Brent apparently mentally out to lunch, for some reason they had turned to me. "You were the first one to notice this," said Susan, one of our designers. She peered at me through her glasses. I could see tears running down her face, and I had never known her to cry. "How did you know? What did you see?" I tried to answer, but my voice would not come. I cleared my throat and quietly told my story again. I told them about the weird things with the television, the odd feeling in my gut, and the radio stations. Nothing seemed to make anyone feel any better. Why would it? If anything, I saw fear turn into some kind of distrust toward me. Guys, it's not like I created this. I held both hands out in front of me to fend off their stares. I'm as freaked out about this as all of you. I lost my wife, damn it. Some of them turned away then, but far too many kept staring at me with intense eyes, accusatory eyes. I saw Lane and Jake hold hands and walk away from the group, their heads down. They were never ones for PDA, especially not at work, but when the end of the world crashed into the building where you worked, I guess decorum went out the window. I moved away from them all, back toward my easy chair. I felt an odd pang, remembering how Jessie had sat in the opposite chair just last night. Now she was gone. I stared out the window. How could someone hate clouds? Well, I found I hated them. I studied the white and gray mass below as it moved past the building. It was an endless ocean of clouds. No breaks. Even the ocean showed coral reefs and was broken up by islands and land. The night sky had stars. Here, there was nothing. I thought, just for a moment, I saw a shadow move within the clouds. My heart stopped for a moment as my dream returned to my mind. A globe covered in this, held in the palm of some giant creature with a giant eye. When I leaned forward to get a better look, there were just clouds. I studied the other buildings nearby. One of them, across what should have been a bustling city street, had a giant antenna. I could barely see the top of the roof, and there were times a wave of clouds washed over it, swallowing the base of that antenna. Yes, the clouds were getting higher. Slowly. Slower than a lava flow, but it was happening. Eventually, even this tall building would be swallowed by whatever this was. What was it? It was hard to dispense with that question. Obviously, whatever was down there was not just regular clouds. I knew I would likely never find the answer to this question, but my brain kept returning to it again and again. I looked around the room. In the distance, most of the rest of the people stood around or sat down. I could hear people crying. The realization this was happening, something so completely insane but so deadly, had truly slammed home. I suspected there would be others who would decide to just head down into the elevator for this all to end. It would be much faster to vaporize in an instant than slowly starve to death here. Although the clouds were climbing higher, given how slowly it was happening, the starvation was more likely to happen first. I wasn't quite ready yet. Brent's words about this being an alive thing that could be killed kept rolling through my mind. However, to kill it, I needed to know more about it. I turned my chair, stared hard out the window at the clouds. I folded my arms across my chest. I watched. And I discovered something. The more I stared at the clouds, the more I heard, or thought I heard, the clouds talking back to me. Voices began to fill my head in harsh whispers at first. The longer I stared, the louder the voices became, the more urgent the need. Just come down. Feed us. We're so hungry. Let us feed. It will be over so quick. As I write this now, I wonder if it was imaginary. At the time, though, I was certain. Brent was right, I thought. Whatever was out there was alive in some form or fashion. Alive and hungry. I had this distinct thought it was a group of entities, moving from one place to the next, just devouring all living matter. It all sounds crazy now. Wishful thinking. Perhaps an attempt to put some kind of rationalization, no matter how crazy, on a completely irrational event. Something snapped me out of my trance. I wasn't sure what it was, but when it happened, I had to go to the bathroom very badly. My eyes were dried out as if I had not blinked for hours. I was also very hungry. My legs were stiff, and as I tried to stand up, they popped and groaned. I nearly fell headfirst into the windows in front of me. The world was quiet. I guessed it was getting to be mid-afternoon, but today, even the sun seemed dimmer. It felt like the entire universe was collapsing, dying, dimming, and fading out. Perhaps it was. Perhaps this thing was spreading out, like in my dream, devouring the other planets, but not finding anything of sustenance there. The floor itself was quiet. Well, at first it seemed totally silent, but as I listened, I did hear sounds. Steady sounds and people moaning. Other than that, there wasn't much. No crying or wailing. I walked slowly. There was no need to hurry. In the kitchen area, people sat around the tables staring at nothing. A few were eating scraps of the leftovers from the fridge. All of the faces looked lost, haunted, staring. I wondered if they were also hearing the voices. I headed for the fridge and saw there was some pizza left, but not much. I grabbed a couple of the squares and ate them cold, standing right by the sink. They tasted like cardboard, but they settled the grumbling in my stomach for the time being. I walked away from the zombies and back toward where I had been sitting. I turned the corner and headed toward the conference rooms and the area beyond where there were more desks. I figured Brent would be there writing on the windows, and maybe he'd come up with a theory. As I rounded the corner and got to the part where the conference room stood, I heard the moaning coming from the room in the corner. Although it had a glass door, there was no way to see what was going on in there without walking in and turning another corner. Judging by the sounds, there were several people in there going at it. Whatever, I thought, and why not? I was almost tempted to walk in and see who it was, but decided it didn't matter much to me. I walked a little ways further and was nearly past the smaller conference rooms when something out of the corner of my eye caught me. Something on the floor behind the table near the corner of the room. At first, I thought it might have just been a couple of people sleeping, but something inside me told me it was more than that. I pushed through the door. It was completely silent. Not even any heavy breathing from someone who was asleep. "Hello?" I asked. "Hey, who's in here?" There was no response, so I stepped into the room and drew closer to the shapes in the corner. As I got closer, the shapes took on forms, and the forms became those I recognized. It was Jake and Lane. They were next to each other, holding hands, very close to one another. Neither of them was moving, and I stood there watching, waiting to see them make some motion that would indicate they were alive. Nothing. They weren't breathing. I knelt down and touched Lane's wrist, then Jake's. Both were ice cold. As I studied the scene further, I saw a nearly empty bottle of pills lying near their heads. Their eyes were closed, and they looked as if they had just drifted off to sleep. No convulsion, no vomiting, just sleep, and then gone. There were still pills in the bottom of the bottle. I picked it up and shook it. Maybe half of a handful was left in there. I tucked it into my pocket. I had no idea how bad things would get, but taking pills and falling asleep would be better than starving to death. Was it better than whatever happened in the elevator? I had no idea, but possibly. "I'm sorry, guys," I whispered, not entirely sure what I was apologizing for, but feeling I needed to say something. "Sleep well. I hope you're on the other side together." That was a comforting thought for me. Go to sleep and wake up somewhere else with my wife there waiting for me. I exited the room and turned left. There were a few more people here, sitting at the desks, just staring straight ahead. There were a few other people on the floor, sleeping. In the distance, at the far end of the room, was Brent. Jesus. Brent had taken off his sport coat and rolled up his shirt sleeves. Sure enough, he had a dry erase marker and was writing on the windows. In fact, he had already written all over the windows. As I drew closer, I tried to make out what he had written. I realized as I got halfway there, Brent had pushed past the area of sensible thought. That's a fancy way of me trying to say Brent had gone batshit crazy. "What is it?" That was the first thing written near the top of the window. "Is it alive?" That sentence was written just below the first. Then the window became a mass of different colored markers. He had written things, then drawn lines through them. There were half-written theories which ended mid-sentence. In other areas were more lines, ending in arrows, pointing to things around which he had drawn circles. Brent was normally a very neat writer. However, at some point here, his scribbles had become frantic. I couldn't even make out words. "Poison?" I managed to make that one out at the far side of one of the panes of glass. It was over there by itself, without much else written around it. Were these ideas for things that might kill whatever was below us? Voices. It took me a moment to find another word I could recognize. The entire mass of writing was like playing some puzzle game. Find the words among all of this scribble, perhaps. "Brent?" I asked, hesitantly. Brent turned and looked at me, and when I saw his face, I knew a couple of things instantly. First, he had definitely gone around the bend, over the cliff, and fallen into utter insanity. The second was that he was definitely hearing the voices. I tried to imagine what this was like for a man as illogical as Brent, for a man who could put the world in neat little boxes, store them in the warehouse of his brain, and could tap into the information whenever he wanted. This thing was something beyond understanding. He was trying so hard to put this entire thing into boxes, but those must have been rupturing and blowing apart. Each time that happened, more of his sanity went with it. "Hey," he said, but his voice was hoarse and cracked. "Hey, Brent, when was the last time you took a break?" I asked, trying to sound comforting and cajoling. "Maybe you need to step away and get something to drink at least. There's some food left." Brent's left eye twitched. He chewed at his lower lip for a bit, as if considering it. "No," he said at last. "I don't think so. I need to figure this out." I think I'm close. Have you heard the voices?" His eyes vibrated in their sockets. They were red and bloodshot around the pupils and irises. "Yes," I replied. "Do you understand what they're trying to say? They're trying to tell us that this is alive. What we're dealing with here is some kind of hive mind. The clouds are a combination of billions and billions of smaller living things." The voices had not told me any such thing, but maybe Brent had opened his mind up to more things than I had. Still, what did this mean? "What does that tell us, Brent?" I asked. "Great, so it's a hive mind, but how does that get us out of this?" Brent's eyes vibrated in their sockets, and he smiled. "There is no getting out of this. We're just food for them. The entire universe is just food for them. They'll come for us. You can see it. I know you can. You saw that the clouds are getting higher. They'll get here eventually and eat us, too." I didn't know how to respond. Obviously, Brent had gone around the bend. As I leaned in, I realized there was a foul smell coming from him. I didn't think insanity had a smell, but I did think Brent had foregone going to the restroom when he needed to. "Okay, then," I said, slowly backing away. "Let me know if you come up with something else, something we can use." "Just keep this in mind," Brent said. "Jake and Lane might have had the right idea. Keep that in mind." Brent stood up and looked around until he found something on the desk. I was still walking backwards, unable to process what was happening. "Yes, I think they have the right idea," Brent said, his voice getting higher than I had ever heard it in the past. "They have the right idea." I realized he had a pen in his right hand, but what happened was too fast for me to do anything. He shoved the pen into his neck and twisted until the blood shot from the open wound across the room and all over the floor. "The right idea." He just kept saying it as the blood drained from him, and he eventually staggered and fell to the floor. Once there, he twitched a few more times and then lay still. I wanted to scream. I mean, wouldn't you? However, the horror of what I had just seen seemed to pale in comparison to the horror all around us. I felt my gorge rise and ran to the restroom just in time to throw up the little bits of pizza I had eaten earlier into the sink. People fucking their lives away in one area, at least 3 people committing suicide in another. Outside and below us, the end of the fucking world. Christ. A hive mind, I thought. Brent was sure the voices were telling him this, but what use was it? I pulled the bottle of pills I had taken from Lane's body earlier and studied them. Just pills to help you get by until you took too many of them and they became poison. I felt hot and feverish. I felt like the floor beneath me was unbalanced, and I had the overwhelming feeling of wanting to stagger against the wall. I knew I was having some kind of panic attack, but what good would that do to anyone? I held on to the sink and stared at my face. The world was filled with the sound of the billions of voices. I could hear them all of the billions and trillions of tiny living particles that made up the fog or clouds or whatever the fuck they were, all of them telling me to just give up, either lay down and die right here, or just come down, come on down, come down and see what lay beyond the veil. "Stop!" I yelled and put both hands to my ears as if that would stop the voices in my head. It did cause them to dim. I closed my eyes tight, waited for things to stabilize beneath me. When I opened them again, my red face stared back with bloodshot eyes. In fact, blood trickled from my right nostril. I wiped it away without a thought, then washed my hands and face. Once my face was no longer smeared with blood, I exited the bathroom. I turned away from the gore on the floor to my right and headed back toward the conference rooms. As I got near the orgy room, one of the female designers strutted out, her eyes dreamy, her clothing a bit askew. She did not look altogether there, and I had to wonder if other drugs, besides the one Lane and Jake had used, were being passed around. Probably, but who cared at this point? Trillions upon trillions of tiny living things who only existed to devour. Certainly there had been people on the planet who were on drugs or had cancer or something that would have caused them to die, having been consumed. However, I couldn't help but wonder what would happen if I were to take the pills remaining in Lane's bottle and then offer myself up as a meal. I tried to remember what happened within beehives. I supposed there were no more beehives right now. Strange thought. It wasn't entirely like if you poisoned one bee, you could kill the entire hive, but it did work that way with ants. You got one of those scouts covered in poison ant bait, and it took it back to the nest and got everyone else. I wondered for the first time if maybe the trillions of little creatures out there eating everything were actually already sick. I tried to imagine the thousands and thousands of people out there on medications with cancerous tumors, poisoned livers, the people with blood diseases and other problems, all of them consumed by these tiny things, and perhaps they were sick too. The voices did not tell me one way or the other. I wonder if anyone else had heard anything. Apparently Brent had not. I stood there at the window again, looking out at the clouds. No higher than earlier, but I could almost feel them creeping their way up the side of the building. They were never satiated. Endless hunger. I realized at some point I was holding the bottle of pills in my hand. I looked down at it. I wondered if there were enough pills in there to even do the job I needed it to do. The office was silent. The world was silent. I couldn't, of course, hear exactly what was going on outside, but even at this height, we could always hear horns, the kids on the corner banging on plastic bucket drum sets for spare change, and sirens. I realized I hadn't heard anything like that for a couple days now. I imagined if I could get up on the roof of the building, the world would be silent. No birds, not a dog barking. Just the sound of the wind against my ears and the voices in my head. Those voices. They were constant now, but they were telling me to just sit down, relax, let them come to me. As I looked around at the others, all sitting there staring at nothing, I wondered if they had just given in and listened. They would sit there until they starved, died of thirst, or just waited until the fog reached them. I sighed, ready to sit there with them, but I had to try something. How far was I willing to go? Did it matter? I decided to find some paper and a printer not far from where Brent had bled all over the office. I stepped in tacky, sticky, dried blood to find it, but then sat down at one of the desks and started writing. I wrote out everything that has happened until now. By the time I was done, it was dark out, and I decided it was time to get some sleep. Day 3. I woke up this morning, and everything was silent, more so than before. I got up and walked around again. Everyone was just sitting or laying on the floor, eyes wide, staring at nothing. I could hear the voices in my head telling me to do the same. I even ventured into the orgy room to find 4 naked people entwined, but immobile. As I walked back to the desk, one of the zombie people turned his head and looked at me. It was so strange. "Just sit down and relax," their voice said in an odd monotone. "Just sit down and let this all happen." "Fuck you," I replied. So, here I sit, just wasting time, resisting the voices, just thinking, delaying. I never wanted to be in this life I have now. I never wanted to work for a big corporation or spend my days in an endless drive from the suburbs to downtown. Endless hours in the car and away from my wife, who was gone now, along with the rest of the world. I just wanted to tell stories. From the earliest days of my life, that was all I wanted. I wanted to write and tell stories to people. I guess that's what I'm doing now, but who knows who will ever read it. Do I think that some alien civilization will show up and eventually read this? Maybe some narcissistic part of me thinks so. It's still early. The sun is just coming up over the horizon. I guess this is the end of the story, right? Well, here's my plan, as stupid and useless as this might actually be in the end. The plan is to take the rest of the pills, then wait until I feel them starting to take effect. Hopefully I don't fuck it all up and wait too late, but have it together enough to summon one of the elevators. Then I head down and, hopefully, poison the hive. Will it matter? Probably not. Just one person will not be enough to wipe out the hive, but maybe just one more person among the thousands of others the hive ate and were sick might do something. Maybe I'd at least make a few of those fuckers sick. It's not much of a plan. I get it. If you do read this centuries from now, just realize I understand this doesn't do anything to accomplish much. However, when you sit here and face the end of the world, you want to hit back, even if you just give the behemoth a bloody nose before it smashes you to pieces. I am just trying to give the giant a bloody nose. I took the pills about 10 minutes ago, and I'm starting to feel drowsy. If I don't go now, maybe it won't even give the giant a bloody nose. We were people and a civilization, and we had hopes and dreams. Maybe most of us had dreams and plans to make things better. Then this happened. Don't judge us too harshly. I've got an elevator to catch. What do you think? Did our narrator make the right decision? What would you do? There may be no good answer. There usually are just more questions. When the sun vanishes, the stars come out, the monsters awaken. When the night comes out. You've been listening to When the Night Comes Out, a weekly horror anthology podcast with stories by Bryan W. Alaspa and narrated and produced by Allie James. Music by Vivek Abhishek. For Bryan's work, visit his website at bryanwalaspa.com or visit amazon.com to find his books of fiction and nonfiction. Find Allie's work on Facebook at Allie James Projects. And don't forget to visit our website to figure out how to support us on Patreon. Thanks for another great season, and we'll see you next time when the night comes out.